Welcome back, everyone, to another Funderbeam podcast. We've been pretty active on the content front, and this is the second podcast recording this week, and going to be the third overall. As most of you who have listened or watched so far will know, we've focused pretty exclusively on founder stories, and today we're going to just look at something a little bit different. And this is something that, for those of you listening in the UK, we don't really have anything quite like, and it's a super interesting story. And I think for those interested in investing, it's a really interesting way of finding out information in real time. And anyway, let's get straight to it. So I'm joined by Juhan Lang from Investor Toomas, and rather than me try to explain this from scratch, Juhan, I'm going to pass over to you just to give everyone the elevator story, if you like, of Investor Toomas. If you could just provide a little summary, that would be great.
Yeah, first of all, I'm extremely glad to be here, and thank you for inviting me. So yeah, about the Investor Toomas, it's a quite unique project. It's to tell the long story short, in 2002, the biggest business newspaper in Estonia decided to start to invest the real money in the markets. So it's Äripäev, it's the biggest business media in Estonia. It's owned by Bonniers, which is the biggest media house in Scandinavia and one of the biggest in Europe. The management of Äripäev invested 64,000 euros into the markets, and all the decisions are made by our journalists, the ones that are working with markets. It's a small team. It has been like 3 to 5 members, and the reason behind this project was to prove that everybody, ordinary people, journalists, are capable of investing by themselves. You don't need any professionals, and to manage your own portfolio, it's something to inspire the people. And the idea behind it was that basically everybody is capable of managing the money just as well, if not better, than the average expert or professional. And of course, there were many reasons behind it. It was the idea of financial freedom, just to show that if you take responsibility, if you invest your own money, you can have quite good returns and retire early or retire with better results. So the target for this project was to earn at least average 12% in a year, so that the 64,000 euros would turn into 2 million in 30 years. And all the decisions, all the investments, all the trades have been public since the beginning. It's now 20 years from the beginning of the project. And perhaps another idea behind the project, if you read the financial media from Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, or any other business media, we got lots of critics from the readers about the stories. So the journalists are just writing the stories. They're not responsible for nothing. So one of the basis of this idea was to show what will really happen if we will do according to our own advice. So this is the story behind it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Not just overall, but how you mentioned about how we can explain in simple language or with explanations how people can get into investing. I think one of the issues we have, especially now, and this is different from 2002, of course, but now there's so many different platforms, so many different ways to invest in from securities to commodities to crypto to everything. And there isn't really just one app you can do everything, not really, although there are some that are getting there. And I think that something like Investor Toomas does help kind of maybe give people some ideas on where to start, because maybe it's where to start, especially if you're young and you've got not loads of disposable income to do this with. like at the moment, you're getting pushed crypto everywhere. Short-termism rather than the long-term. And actually, the really good thing about Toomas, I think, is the 30-year goal is really interesting because this could mirror someone's life. I mean, if in the right way of thinking. What talking of that audience, what have been the challenges since you've been on the Toomas project with regards to building the audience trust? Why should they believe Toomas, although he's obviously got a very good track record now? But why should they take the Toomas word for it over anyone else, for example?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Actually, I think the project kind of took off. If we're speaking about the attention of the audience, I think it took off better in the last couple of years because we have really like a 20 years of track record. The beginning was definitely not the smoothest. Obviously, we got lots of critics from the professionals. And so on, but definitely I think this honesty, transparency, also accountability, because we are really our audience can really see the real results. We usually tell ahead the investments that we make. Just last week we held the biggest investment conference in Estonia. It's called Investor Toomas conference, and we made like a real investment from the States. We bought Microsoft. The year earlier, we bought some other Estonian stock. So we make even the investments we make under the eyes of audience. They see the results. They see the results during all those years. So definitely this is one of the things. Another thing, Investor Toomas is well ahead of the big indexes. If we speak about SP 500 or Stocks Europe 600, so the average return is way better than the big indexes. And another thing, so if I take the whole history since 2002 to go to the numbers, so SP 500 including dividends, the return has been 367%, and Stocks Europe 600 it's 211%, and Investor Toomas overall return has been around 800%, and the average return has been 11.5% in a year. So we don't have any professional in Estonia, any active money manager who have actually done better than Toomas or managed the clients' money better than Toomas did. I don't think there's any active money manager in Estonia who has actually who beat the SP 500 in those 20 years. I don't know any. So I think this definitely is one of the things that is building the trust.
They're incredible results. There's no doubt about it. Now, have you ever had people from outside the organization ring you up and ask to manage their funds?
Another thing about Toomas' portfolio, it's relatively small. So the 64,000 euros right now is around 550K. So we're not actually managing like a big money, not the millions or billions. But we have people from Toomas' team who moved on to the financial sector. The story behind the team, we are not actually like a professional money managers. This is something that we wanted to prove. We have very different background. We are coming from the different areas. So speaking about education, we have like a journalist background and historical background and so on. So very different backgrounds, definitely amateurs.
So you mentioned just before that there was some skepticism maybe from traditionalists and investors. How's that changed over the years? Are you now just part of the investor community and that's Toomas, or are there still traditionalists that kind of look with a raised eyebrow at what you guys are doing?
Yeah, in Estonia, there's a really like an active forum for investors. It's called LHV Forum. It's the biggest bank when you speak about the Estonian capital base, the biggest bank in Estonia. And they have a forum and a thread about Investor Toomas, and you can go back to 2002 and read the comments. So I think we got more criticism since the beginning. definitely the professionals were concerned if we are not taking too much risks or not giving too opportunistic advice. But when we look back to those 20 years, it actually has been quite an opposite. So we have only had 2 negative years in the whole history. So financial crisis in 2008, Investor Toomas portfolio lost less than 12% when Lehman Brothers collapsed. And when we compare with Estonian retirement funds, that's supposed to be like extremely conservative, they fell more than 20% in average. So we did way better when we take risk-adjusted returns than the most conservative retirement funds in Estonia. So actually what we have proved, and we have written about it a couple of articles, actually risk-adjusted basis, when we talk about Sharpe ratio or Sortino ratio, the returns have been way better than the indexes. And since it has been like this, I think we took away most of the weapons that the professionals had to attack Investor Toomas. So last couple of years, we haven't got so much critics.
Well, that's cool. And Toomas is a man of the people, right? This is the whole thing. So it's great that there's less criticism and it's looked at, with kind of kinder eyes. In terms of your actual strategy, without getting into too much detail, I mean, how do you guys do it as a team? Is it a weekly, monthly sort of thing, or do you constantly talk about it? And then do you have the set times of the week or the month that you actually take on your new investments or get rid of some older ones, or is it just kind of more agile?
Yeah, actually, we have asked the advice of the professionals. So some of the things we copied from the industry professionals. So a couple of years ago, we had our own checklist and weekly meetings. So every week, one of us had to pitch some idea, what to buy or what to sell. But somehow lately, last couple of years, we haven't done it anymore because so many ideas are popping up constantly. There's lots of new IPOs coming, so we don't have any lack of ideas. It's in the past we had more this issue, but not anymore. And also we are quite heavily invested. Almost 100% of our portfolio is invested right now, so we are quite aggressive on the market. So there's not so much cash to discuss about it. And we have a couple of positions that right now, if I speak about the portfolio, that we are thinking of selling if we see better alternatives. But it's not so systematic anymore. It's more like when the idea comes, we are trying to find the money or sell some other weaker positions. And speaking about the overall strategy of Investor Toomas, then mostly it's invested in big blue chip stocks. And what we are looking for, there's a basic checklist that we're looking for in every company. Are the products and the services irreplaceable? Does the company have a huge competitive advantage? Is the business in the growth stage? We want that the growth stocks will dominate in the portfolio. And what we're also after, that we're always asking from ourselves, is could it be in the beginning of the new growth cycle when we speak about some companies? So when you think about Microsoft, our last purchase, so it goes to all this checklist. It's growing faster than some startups. It's definitely growing. It's super profitable and giving good results.
Making interesting acquisitions recently as well.
Yeah,
Microsoft.
yeah.
Very interesting. So just roughly, because obviously a lot of people listening to this podcast and associated with Funderbeam are in the startup or growth stage world, what rough percentage of the total portfolio is in the sort of more high risk stocks or investments?
Right now, I think if we consider all the riskier assets, is around 5%, but we are willing to go until 20%. In theory, if we find very very good investment ideas, then I think around 10 to 20% we are willing to invest in so-called startups or more riskier assets. But right now, I think it's around maybe 5% of overall portfolio in riskier assets. In Funderbeam, right now we have Ampler bikes and the Bikekeep in our portfolio.
Where does the sort of startup investment sit in your kind of long-term plan? I mean, there's some fairly well-known statistics out there that most startups don't reach an exit stage between 8 to 10 years. Now, talking of Ampler or Bikekeep or any of those, I mean, is Investor Toomas prepared to hold on to things for that sort of length of time in order to realize the investment?
Yeah, certainly. So in theory and actually in practice, we have 10 years to go. So 10 years is exactly what we have left. And the reason why we started investing in startups, it was actually last year when we made our first startup investment, was that we wanted higher returns, higher risk and higher return in our portfolio. And we saw that adding a little bit of riskier assets, it might be good overall to our portfolio. So Investor Toomas has, if you take the corporate life cycle, so stage 1 is a startup, stage 2 is like a young growth companies, stage 3 high growth companies, and stage 4 to 5 I would consider like a mature, stable companies, blue chips, Microsoft, Apple, so on. And stage 6 dividend stocks, companies that are already at the end of their growth cycle or even declining. So we feel very comfortable with stages 4 and 5. Those companies like Microsoft, we have Ryanair, for example, mature big companies. Basically, the value drivers, what we're looking is operating margins, return on capital. It's more numbers than the narrative. So when we go to startups, to stage 1, it's most certainly more riskier. That's why we don't add too much money on those investments, but we also hope to get higher returns. But we are definitely expecting one or another company to go bankrupt, or this is definitely in our scenario.
And how, as a project, as a brand, you mentioned there's 10 years left. I mean, highly likely in that time that the team will change in some way. How do you vet a new person coming into Toomas? How do they prove themselves to get into the fabled world?
But this is something that we have done in the past. So the people have changed. So there's no original authors who have been in a team since 2002. There have been around 20 people behind this project, and definitely there most likely there are always some changes in the team. But this is actually something that, for the reader's perspective, it's quite interesting that we don't have any good stock picker, that I'm the best one picking the stocks, and if I am leaving, then the project will collapse. Definitely not. I think it's we have proved to our audience that more important than the people behind the project is the principles that you're keeping. So since the beginning, we have basically the same principles. We haven't got too far from the initial idea. We're trying to find the stocks that have a good growth, or investments that have good growth potential, that are undervalued. So the same principles have held the project. I think maybe we have some mind shift in the last 5 to 10 years, that we are trying to find more growth ideas than value ideas. Because we saw that our portfolio average return was around 9%, and so we had to do something to get the return higher, since the initial target was 12%. So this is something that we consider. Our risk and all our investments have to kind of go under this rule, that we are aiming to get 12% in average in a year.
That's kind of cool, because I think the other thing is, when people start investing, it's almost like, let's start and see what happens. And if I think that there's going to be some nice growth, then I sort of stick with it. But I wonder how many people sit down with a specific target and say, right, well, I can't get any interest in my bank at the moment. Property yields are probably 6%, but I'm not selling property every year. And how can I get to this sort of mythical 8-9% returns on things? So it's quite an interesting discipline, isn't it, to think of your investments with that rule in mind, rather than just going on the, I think there'll be some growth or gut feeling all the time.
Yeah. I think it's true, and it makes the process more simple for the team as well. So when I take the best investment from Investor Toomas portfolio right now, so for example, Microsoft, we started to buy the Microsoft shares in 2009, and we accumulated in 2009, and then we bought more in 2014. And right now, I think our initial investment was around 10,000 euros or to $10,000. Right now, the profit is more than 100,000, and it's been up like 1,400%. And I think one of the lessons from Investor Toomas is that the big money is in a big moves or in a long time. So we haven't read all the annual or quarterly reports of Microsoft. We just maybe go through the reports in diagonal to see if it's all going fine and if there's no crucial news. So the best stocks tend to go up a lot in a long term. So you don't have to do anything else, just to hold on. And Microsoft is one good example, actually, that if you take the startup investments as well, just as a comparison, when the dot-com bubble bursted in the beginning of 2000, I think Microsoft stock was like 17 years underwater. You had to really hold on in a long time to get substantial returns. So you sometimes just have to really be prepared to go that stocks will not move up much, maybe 5 years or so. So you really have to be capable of sitting tight long time and not to lose the perspective.
Well, I guess, and this is the same for all really big firms. They have the capacity to adapt to market forces much better. And I think, specifically talking about Microsoft, I think a few people a decade ago was not sure where they were going to go because software as a service was appearing. Microsoft made an awful lot of money selling Microsoft Office and other things on DVD and all the rest of it. And of course, they pivot well. I mean, no one would have seen Microsoft getting into video games full stop, but they made an Xbox and the rest is history. So it's that kind of, maybe not the hard financial analysis all the time, but the kind of general understanding of a business in the market and the stories behind it. That I think those big companies, easy to find those stories as well, right? And it's hard to find information on smaller businesses that aren't maybe doing as much in the market. So apart from the 10 years, what happens at the end of the 10 years, by the way? I'm sure our listeners are thinking, okay, what happens when this gets to 10 years?
Yeah, actually, the honest answer is that we haven't decided it yet. We actually started another project, like a side project in Latvia. So we gave 25,000 euros of Investor Toomas portfolio and started another Investor Toomas in Latvia. It's basically the same idea, just a smaller amount. And we are running similar project there now. So investor Andris is managing his 25,000 and buying and selling stocks and doing crowdfunding investments and sharing this. So we have had ideas to export this kind of project. We have got our audience have always asked that or pointed out that they would like to have a way to invest in as Investor Toomas. So like to make a fund of Investor Toomas. This is one idea that once in a while pops out. But the honest truth is that we haven't decided it yet. We don't have like a clear understanding what will happen after.
It's really, I think that the Latvia thing is really interesting because I'm sure a few people listening are thinking, well, is there one of these in my country? Where can I see something similar? And I don't think there really is, genuinely. I mean, there's obviously influencers who do their own thing. But I think the committee or team idea is rare, which is what makes it so interesting. So those are the future. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, and just one step ahead of us would be like a completely like democratic way of managing the money, so the audience itself could invest or find some kind of consensus. I don't know how it would work out, but it might. So,
well, it's interesting because it kind of ties in with the Web3 metaverse type thing, where things are going to be much more open and collaborative going forward. I'm sure there'll be lots of interest in that. On a personal note, how has Toomas affected or impacted your life as a journalist? I mean, do you find yourself thinking like Toomas when you're seeing business stories, or are you still thinking like Juhan?
Yeah, once in a while, most certainly. So all the people behind Investor Toomas, they're investors themselves, very different portfolios. So I think some of the lessons that I learned managing Investor Toomas money, I definitely took for myself too. So one of the biggest mistakes perhaps that we made with Investor Toomas is selling excellent companies too soon. One of the worst ones, one of the worst mistakes for us has been Apple. So Investor Toomas first time Investor Toomas wanted to actually buy Apple shares. It was in 2005, and that time I think if you adjust with the splits and all the rest, I think you could have it like with $1.9, so it could be up like more than 100 times for now. And Investor Toomas actually went to buy, but he wanted a couple of cents cheaper price, and he didn't buy. So he bought in 2012, and quite soon after we started to take profit. It went up a couple of 100%. And I think new Apple Watch came out, and we were very critical. Like, who will buy this? They lost their idea, and it's not like it was during the time of Steve Jobs and so on. So we constantly took profit, and I think when there was really like a $5,000 left, we thought, let's keep it as a seed money. Like let's keep those couple of shares in our portfolio, in the bottom of portfolio. And now when I'm looking Investor Toomas account, I see that even this 5,000 has turned into 50,000 with a couple of years. So you really can see how much damage can you do to your portfolio when you sell excellent companies. This is one of the things that I'm trying to keep in my mind.
It's difficult, I think. I mean, the general investor landscape has changed so much, and I think crypto has a big part to play in this. The kind of profiteering and the day trading mentality has kind of taken over, I think, certainly in younger people. And I just don't think that idea of building a long-term portfolio is in people's minds quite so much. I think that these sort of conversations kind of bring it back to me, actually. Think, what's not necessarily what's the rush here, but slow and steady maybe does win the race, especially 30 years of slow and steady. It's actually a really stark reminder to a lot of people. Before we head off, and we obviously just saying out loud, of course, Funderbeam, well, we can't offer any advice, and we're not promoting any stocks, and of course, the capital at risk if you do any of these things. But just in terms of that general advice that you'd give from what you've learned from Toomas to people looking to either start their investing journey rather than specifics, what would be the kind of one or two things that you've pulled out of your time with Toomas that might help people get started?
Yeah, I think when people are asking us like what's the success behind Investor Toomas, I think one of the very good things is accountability. So we always tell the people to maybe start a blog about your investments, or keep yourself somehow accountable. When I spoke with the traders, the best traders, they always tend to say that show me the trader with the good record keeping, and I will show you a good trader. So I think you really have to write down why you're investing or why you're doing this trade, and what's your initial idea, what returns are you after, what is your time horizon. I think without those things, very hard to get going. First of all, most certainly you have to have like a target what you're after, because we have 12%. This is something that we are after, and since we have this 12% in the front of us, it basically impacts every single decision that we make. And we are playing which game are you playing? Are you day trading? Are you like investing in 30 years like we are doing? It makes all very different. So for us, we could peacefully buy Microsoft last week, but I think some tactical trader might think that you will have a better options to buy it tomorrow. So maybe with better price. So if you want to time the market or not. But what I think one of the lessons with Investor Toomas is that it's relatively passive, that we don't have to invest too much time into this project, especially into the portfolio. It doesn't require much time to manage this amount of money. If you keep Microsoft in 10 years and Apple and so on. So this definitely, and perhaps one of the another tips that we could give is I think definitely have to trust yourself. And I think if you trust yourself, you keep good records, you can most likely beat the professionals. I think you have to keep an eye on fees, that you don't pay too much for the transaction fees. And another thing that I would like to highlight in Investor Toomas' experience is that we don't actually need to make lots of investments. If I take Investor Toomas' history of 20 years history, I think he bought more than 50 different companies, made more than maybe 100 different investments. I think we could have done way less. So what I spoke before, never sell the biggest winners. And I think the biggest mistakes we made during those 20 years are all related with market timing. So if there's some old book, Reminiscences of a Stock Operator, speaks about Jesse Livermore, one of the most famous traders of last century. He always told that after spending many years in Wall Street and after making and losing millions of dollars, it always was his sitting that made money for him. It never was his thinking. And I think the same thing applies to us.
Yeah, that's interesting. Just before we head off, are there any specific tools or apps that you guys use that you recommend to people? I think this is another thing. It's like, again, we're not recommending using any of these things, but just it can be a bit of a minefield as where to start.
Yeah. So definitely nothing beats the reports, the actual reports of the companies, because there you get the most valuable information. We use Refinitiv, but not because of Investor Toomas. It's more just like a tool for financial journalists, just to find the information and keep the portfolio in one place. I think definitely Investopedia will help. Maybe to find the news about the markets. Finviz has proved quite useful, but of course we are keeping an eye on all the biggest business sites also in the world.
Cool. Okay, look, it's been really interesting. I'm going to let you go and plot your next move with Toomas. Thanks, Juhan, for joining us. Well, I think what we'll try and do is catch up with you towards the end of the year and see how things have gone. Why don't you just, if you want to just tell the audience where they can find out more information about Toomas?
Yeah, I think the first step, they could just Google Investor Toomas, so that our foreigner listeners might be able to read the stories with Google Translate. And we have Instagram and Facebook account is the same, Investor Toomas. It's written with 2 O's, so Estonian way of Toomas. Mm-hmm. So you will find him in social media. You can write to us. We will try to get back to you.
Cool. Okay. Well, look, thanks very much, listeners. Thanks for joining us once again, or listening or watching, whichever way you're doing it. And we'll be back with the next one soon. In that case, thanks, Juhan.
Thank you very much.